thank the organizers for organizing the Lasantha Vikramatunga Memorial Lecture. I worked at Lasantha as a Sunday leader between 1999 and 2002. It is tragic that media censorship and political oppression against which Lasantha struggled valiantly then, and for which he died in 2009, persists 4 years after his death. Following the military campaign, there are fundamentally two ways whereby the present Sri Lanka government has imposed censorship. One is through legislation, the other by physically targeting journalists. I am not going into detail about the legal measures due to the paucity of time. There is, of course, the notorious Prevention of Terrorism Act, but more importantly, there were new regulations that came into effect after armed combat ended in 2009. They mostly pertain to restricting the dissemination of news on the internet and via telecommunication networks. I now come to the second form of control, terrorizing journalists. There are a number of ways whereby this happens: disappearance, abduction, imprisonment, threat, and torture. Pradeep Teknilipura, for whom the empty chair here is dedicated, disappeared from the capital city of Colombo 8 months after the military campaign had ended. Today, the government's only answer to his disappearance is to orchestrate a smear campaign against his wife and refuse to conduct a credible investigation into the incident. The effect of these methods of terrorizing the media has been twofold. Its impact on the media itself is forcing journalists to censor themselves, but its reach is much wider. It closes the mind and our ability to critique and question the status quo. The question is why? Why does the government of Sri Lanka persist in imposing such tight restrictions on the media? Why does it want to endure such withering scorn about the moral turpitude of its leaders and the feebleness of its institutions by doing so? There is more than one reason for this. But one of the most important causes of censorship is that the government doesn't want reports of its conduct during the war to undermine post-war consolidation. Stories of war crimes and crimes against humanity of which the government stands accused must not be published. The LTT too stands accused of these crimes. The government fears that if censorship is lifted and restrictions such as the PTA are no longer in operation, one of the first things the media will do is to go to where the story is. A story long suppressed through censorship. And that is the story of what actually happened during the final months of the war. The government is deeply concerned that these stories will infiltrate southern Sri Lanka, and the moral ugliness of such savagery will be repugnant to many Sinhalese. The fear is that an open discourse will persuade a vast majority of Sinhala people within the country to demand an impartial investigation into war crimes of the political leadership. Thereby, the government will lose its support base. Days after fighting ended, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, speaking on national television, said, and I quote, "Some tried to stop the military campaign by threatening to haul us before war crime tribunals. The strength I have is your support. I am even ready to go to the gallows on your behalf." Rajapaksa has lost almost all support among the Tamils. 4 successive elections proved. The support that he speaks about is the Sinhala base. And if that base feels repulsed by elections, where can he, his family, and senior members of the administration find refuge? It is to clutch onto the legitimacy it enjoys that the Rajapaksa government has embraced its present media policy of preventing stories about policy pivots on ghettoizing the north and to a point the east. The ghettoizing has three aspects to it. The first is militarization. Militarization ensures through surveillance and coercion that information about what happened then and what is happening now does not leak out. The most recent manifestation of this was when the Tamil survivors of armed combat, among others, met UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillai, to relate their woes. They were later subjected to harassment by government authorities. In fact, Sanjan also referred to the same thing a few minutes ago. The second aspect of ghettoizing is by restricting journalists from outside having free access to the north. Now the general perception is that things are better today for journalists to go to the northern Sri Lanka, but that is not strictly correct. Even today, foreign journalists need Defence Ministry clearance to obtain a work visa before entering the country. Also, people interviewed in the north by journalists are subject to harassment by local military authorities. Local journalists can travel to the north without permission, but that does not exclude them from being shadowed and harassed by the military. In this regard, I would like to quote an excerpt written by Rookie in Ground News with regard to accompanying a group of television journalists to the Mani. I quote, "It seems clear the government doesn't want people in other parts of Sri Lanka and the outside world to know the bitter truth of land occupation by the military." End quote. The third element used by the government to ghettoize the Tamils is propaganda. The objective is to show Tamils, especially those living in the north and east, as enemies of the Sinhalese. The other, which has to be pacified and controlled. The policy is being implemented very cunningly by the Rajapaksa regime. The government does not call Tamils enemies of the Sinhalese directly. Instead, the president and his government express platitudes such as that there are no minorities living in Sri Lanka and that all communities live in harmony. But we know this so-called harmony is under a shamelessly single hegemonic state. The moment Tamils try to challenge that domination by agitating for equal rights, the knee-jerk reaction is to label Tamils as terrorists and thereby the other. I would like to cite an example of this. On November 27th last year, when Jaffna University students commemorated those who died in the war, 4 students were arrested, not by the regular police, but by the Terrorism Investigation Division. They were arrested under the PTA. They were never charged, but sent to rehabilitation, that is purportedly reserved for the LTT card. We know the numerous protests that took place throughout 2012, where university students and teachers clashed with police in the south. But never were they detained under the PTA, nor were they sent for rehabilitation. The other could not be clear. Therefore, the regime's policy is very clear. If the government and its leaders are to preserve their primary support base from eroding, they cannot be perceived as war criminals by the Sinhala masses. But for that to happen, the Tamil narrative of Mullivaikkal and military-run North today cannot be told truthfully. Instead, the singular ruling establishment has to push its single hegemonic project by representing the Tamils as the enemy and not as victims of government policy and military brutality. But one might ask, if the primary aim of the government is to control stories of war crimes from the north, why is the media in the south of Sri Lanka subject to privations? The reason is that while the north is important because it is a repository of Tamil's narrative of oppression, the south is important too. If war crimes related issues are to be effectively conceived, censorship has to be blank. Secondly, repression of the people in one part of the country inevitably begets repression in other parts of the country as well. And therefore, the Rajapaksa government is careful to contain incriminating stories from the south as well. To conclude, Media censorship is part of a much bigger strategy. It is mainly to ward off accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity against the Rajapaksa family and the government becoming part of public discussion among the Sinhalese. In order to engineer this favorable image, the government is prepared to censor the media and terrorize journalists. The self-preservation policy of President Rajapaksa and his government runs obviously contrary to the rhetoric of reconciliation. If we want the Sinhalese and Tamils to reconcile, there has to be, first and foremost, a frank dialogue between the two groups. But if official strategy is to prevent that by ghettoizing the North and censoring media throughout the country, reconciliation will remain only in words, not deeds.